Imagine this. You're at a dinner party. Everyone is laughing at a joke you find neither funny nor logically coherent. Conversations orbit around small talk, weather patterns, football games, office gossip. Someone turns to you and asks, "So what do you do?" You begin to answer truthfully, an honest unraveling of your interests, your current philosophical obsessions, perhaps a recent existential question that's kept you up at night. But as you speak, you feel the air around you contract. Eyes glaze over. Someone politely changes the subject. You've just committed social heresy. Not because you were rude. Not because you were wrong. But because you were sincere. You learn slowly but surely that most social interactions are not about exchanging information, but performing rituals. You're supposed to say you're keeping busy when asked how you are. You're supposed to nod, smile, and keep your thoughts neat and small. Complexity is suspicious. Depth is discomforting. Honesty outside the right script is almost dangerous. But here's the paradox. The smarter you are, the more this becomes unbearable. Because intelligence is not just the capacity to solve problems, it's the inability to not notice them. You see the contradictions in polite conversation, the absurdity in social rules. You hear the dissonance between what people say and what they mean. While others flow through the norms like fish in water, you feel like you're drowning in unreality. And that's where the suffering begins. You begin to ask, why do people believe what they believe? Why do they say things they do mean? Why do they praise mediocrity and distrust nuance? Why do they reward obedience but claim to love originality? Why are social norms more about mimicry than truth? These aren't rhetorical questions. They cut to the bone. Because if you're wired to pursue coherence, to follow the logic wherever it leads, then the structure of everyday social life appears not just flawed, but fraudulent. People call this being socially awkward. But is it? Or is it a refusal to participate in a consensual illusion? Imagine being a child who raises their hand to point out a contradiction in the teacher's lesson, and being told to stop overthinking. Imagine being a teenager who sees through the herd behavior in school, but is punished for nonconformity. Imagine being an adult who can spot manipulation in political speech, advertising, even relationships, and is called cynical, difficult, arrogant. It's not arrogance, it's sensitivity, it's awareness, it's an inability to unsee. But here's the cost. The more intelligent you are, the more isolated you become, not because others can't understand you, but because they won't. Because social norms are not designed to reward truth. They are designed to preserve order, harmony, predictability. Those who disrupt the script even gently are unsettling. And so you learn to split yourself. You craft a social self, an actor who smiles, nods, stays quiet during nonsense. And behind it, your real self observes, calculates, sometimes despairs. You become a diplomat to your own mind, a translator between truth and acceptability. Every conversation becomes a subtle negotiation between saying what's real and saying what's safe. And then late at night, when you're finally alone, you ask the question you dare not voice. Is there something wrong with me or with the world? What if the very intelligence that allows you to think critically also traps you in perpetual alienation? What if the norms that others follow so effortlessly are not universal truths, but fragile customs, held together by unspoken fear? What if the cost of seeing clearly is never feeling seen? You are not alone in this struggle, but you feel alone, because the smarter you are, the more invisible the boundaries become, and the more suffocating it is to bump into them. You begin to sense that this isn't just a personal discomfort, but a philosophical crisis, one that thinkers through the ages have hinted at, but that society rarely acknowledges out loud. So the question must be asked, why do highly intelligent people suffer under social norms that others seem to navigate with ease? What psychological and philosophical forces make authenticity feel like rebellion? What is this invisible gravity that pulls so many minds into conformity? And why do some minds resist it with everything they have? To answer that, we must go deeper, into the origins of the norms themselves, the hidden architecture of culture, and the psychology of survival. What if the problem isn't you? What if the problem is civilization itself? You were never taught why the rules existed, only that they must be followed. As a child, the lessons were subtle but relentless. Don't interrupt. Don't be too intense. Don't ask too many questions. Fit in, stay quiet, don't make others uncomfortable. At first, you thought these rules were merely practical, a way to keep peace to maintain kindness. But over time, you noticed something deeper. The rules were not just about behavior. They were about belief. They shaped how you saw yourself and what you were allowed to become. This wasn't education. It was domestication. Let's go deeper. Carl Jung warned that society does not simply tolerate the individual. It shapes the individual through shadow work. The parts of you that are too wild, too true, too threatening to the collective are repressed into what Jung called the shadow. For the highly intelligent, this shadow often includes the very traits that make you you. Intensity, skepticism, pattern recognition, emotional precision, solitude. These are not flaws, they're signals of deep cognition. But society doesn't know what to do with people who think in spirals rather than straight lines. And so, the intelligent person learns to suppress what does not fit. They split themselves. They hide their truth behind masks of palatability. They become self-censors. This creates a quiet war between intellect and identity. Enter Friedrich Nietzsche. He believed most people fear truth more than death, because truth requires transformation, and transformation threatens belonging. For Nietzsche, the herd instinct is not merely a social impulse, it's a survival strategy embedded in the psyche. To question the group is to risk exile, and for much of human history, exile meant death. Now think, if evolution rewarded conformity, then the architecture of the modern mind is built not for freedom, but for safety. The person who adapts, mimics, agrees, that person survives. But the intelligent person, the one who notices flaws in the system, they are a liability. Not because they are wrong, but because they are disruptive. In this light, social norms begin to resemble something darker, not just customs, but constraints. They are not designed to elevate the truth, but to manage it. They are pressure valves, keeping civilization from bursting under the weight of its own contradictions. And here lies the hidden problem. Social norms are unconscious agreements to deny uncomfortable realities. Consider Aldous Huxley's haunting insight in Brave New World. People will not revolt against oppression when they are entertained by it. Huxley argued that modern civilization would not fall to tyranny, but to triviality, a society that distracts itself into obedience. And who notices this first? The intelligent ones, the ones whose minds cannot be numbed by repetition, the ones who see that meaning is being replaced by spectacle, conversation by performance, truth by consensus. But to see this is to suffer, because once you notice the theater, you can no longer enjoy the play. Now imagine you're Jean-Paul Sartre walking through the streets of post-war Paris, observing strangers in cafes performing roles, the waiter being a waiter, the woman being flirtatious, the man being manly. Sartre saw it for what it was, bad faith, a lie we tell ourselves to avoid the terror of freedom. For Sartre, to live authentically is to reject the script. But that rejection is costly. It demands existential responsibility. It means walking alone. And herein lies the paradox. The intelligent person suffers not because they are defective, but because they refuse to defect from reality. They sense that life can be more than mimicry. They want to speak with depth, not code switch through banalities. But the world demands assimilation, not authenticity. So they wear the mask, and the mask begins to rot. Psychologically, this creates what Viktor Frankl called an existential vacuum, a profound emptiness that arises when one's inner life has no outer expression. When intelligence is muted by politeness and insight is crushed by small talk, the soul begins to starve. Depression, anxiety, dissociation, they are not flaws of the intelligent mind. They are the mind's rebellion against inauthentic living. But society doesn't diagnose this correctly. Instead, it pathologizes the person, labels them antisocial, arrogant, overthinking, too intense. A brilliant mind is recast as a broken one. And so the intelligent person is trapped in a double bind. If they conform, they suffer silently. If they resist, they suffer visibly. Let's not sugarcoat this. The world was not built for minds like yours, not the school system, not the workplace, not the algorithms that shape our attention spans, not the politics that reduce truth to slogans, not the culture that prizes likability over integrity. The intelligent suffer because they cannot lie to themselves well enough to be happy in a world that runs on illusions. And yet this is not hopeless, because to see the system is to begin escaping it. To understand the machinery is to stop being crushed by it. What if your suffering is not a malfunction, but a signal? a sign that your mind is too awake to accept the dream. This hidden problem, the collision between authentic thought and social mimicry, is the quiet epidemic of our time. And like all epidemics, it spreads invisibly. It affects the gifted child who is told to stop asking questions, the employee who's punished for saying the inconvenient truth, the thinker who feels alien even among friends. It whispers in boardrooms, classrooms, bedrooms. It hides behind smiles. It hides behind normal. It hides behind success. But now that you see it, can you ignore it? As we move forward, we must trace the shadow further. What does this denial of truth cost us? Not just individually, but collectively. What happens when entire cultures prioritize comfort over clarity, harmony over honesty? The consequences aren't just personal. They shape our institutions, our ideologies, even our sense of reality. The unseen consequences, then, are not just side effects. They are the world we live in. You can live your entire life surrounded by people and still feel like a ghost. That's one of the consequences. Not because you lack empathy, not because you're shy or aloof or arrogant, but because the conversations around you echo like empty chambers. Because you are not responding to what people think, you are responding to what they avoid thinking. You see it in their eyes, a flicker of panic when you scratch the surface too deep, a subtle withdrawal when your honesty demands theirs. And so you drift, not physically, existentially. Let's name it for what it is: isolation by cognition, a severing not of bodies but of resonance. The highly intelligent don't just think differently, they perceive differently. They detect the dissonance between spoken words and felt truths. They sense the implicit contracts in conversations. Don't challenge this. Don't go deeper. Don't make me feel something I've buried. This isn't just painful, it's disorienting. Because the world becomes two layers. The one everyone agrees to pretend is real, and the one underneath that only you seem to notice. And when you try to pull those two worlds together, to speak the unspoken, to reconcile the performance with the reality, you find yourself punished. Subtly, yes, but consistently. Fewer invitations, polite smiles that never reach the eyes, or worse, the accusation of being too much. Too much for what? Too honest for a lie. Too awake for a dream. This dissonance has a name in cognitive science: pluralistic ignorance. A phenomenon where individuals privately reject a norm but go along with it because they believe everyone else accepts it. Think of it, everyone is pretending, waiting for someone else to break the illusion. But no one does, so the illusion persists. This is how entire cultures become hollow. We laugh at jokes we don't find funny. We repeat beliefs we haven't examined. We vote for candidates we don't trust. We share posts we don't understand. We perform normalcy not because we believe in it, but because we fear the alternative. The intelligent mind sees this and recoils. It is not wired to comply with illusions. It is wired to resolve them. But in doing so, it encounters what Daniel Kahneman called System 1 thinking, the fast, automatic, emotionally driven responses that govern most social behavior. People don't want to think their way through social life. They want to feel their way through it. Norms evolve not from truth, but from emotional ease. So when a highly intelligent person introduces complexity, ambiguity, or intellectual challenge, they don't stimulate curiosity. They trigger anxiety. The brain, after all, is not designed to pursue truth. It is designed to avoid pain. This avoidance creates a feedback loop. The more intelligent you are, the more clarity you seek. The more clarity you seek, the more discomfort you create. The more discomfort you create, the more the system excludes you, slowly, systematically. And that exclusion seeps into everything. Workplace dynamics. You propose a bold idea, and it's dismissed, then repackaged a month later by someone safer. Romantic relationships. You try to connect on a soul level, but your depth is mistaken for intensity or neediness or detachment. Friendships. You find yourself editing your thoughts, measuring your words, asking yourself, will they get this? Or should I just smile and nod? And over time, you begin to internalize the rejection. Not consciously, not loudly, but insidiously. You begin to wonder if maybe you are broken. Maybe you do need to tone it down, simplify, dim the light just enough to not blind others. And with every compromise, a part of you dies, a quiet, almost imperceptible death. Not of body, not of mind, but of authentic presence. And that death has societal consequences. Because when the most perceptive among us are silenced, society loses its mirrors. When its questioners are shamed, society loses its compass. When its truth-tellers retreat, society loses its soul. What emerges is not progress, but stagnation. Not community, but conformity. We call it culture, but it's often just a well-decorated echo chamber. Even worse, we reward this stagnation. We elect the charismatic, not the wise. We promote the agreeable, not the insightful. We celebrate the confident, not the self-aware. And so the intelligent person watches as the world builds monuments to mediocrity, then wonders why they feel like an exile. They are not exiled by force, but by friction. Their very presence disrupts the script, and disruption, no matter how necessary, is rarely welcome. Yet perhaps the most tragic consequence is this. You start to doubt the value of your own mind. You begin to suppress your questions, your insights, your hunger for meaning, not because you've lost them, but because you've learned they have no place to land. You dim yourself, not out of humility, but out of exhaustion. You convince yourself that maybe surface-level connection is enough, that maybe it's okay to just play the part. But something in you refuses. A spark, a restlessness, a knowing. It stirs at night when the world is asleep. It whispers during quiet walks, during books that challenge, during music that aches with truth. It knows that this dissonance you feel isn't a defect. It's a sign that you're still alive, still attuned to something real. And perhaps, despite the cost, this dissonance is sacred. Because in a world that rewards sleepwalking, suffering is often proof of awareness. But awareness is only the beginning. The question now is, how do you live in this world without betraying yourself? How do you maintain your depth in a culture that fears it? How do you speak truth in a language designed for evasion? These are not easy questions, but they are the only questions worth asking. Because behind the pain, behind the loneliness, behind the misfittedness, there is a hidden strength, a capacity not just to survive the illusion, but to break it, to forge a path not of rebellion for its own sake, but of redefinition. This is where the journey turns. Not inward to self-blame, not outward to vengeance, but upward to liberation. It begins with one realization. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to wake others up. You wake up one morning, and something in you has changed. You're tired, but not just physically. You're tired of pretending, of shrinking, of apologizing for how your mind works. You've played the role long enough. The smile that never reaches your eyes, the half-truths offered to make others comfortable, the careful editing of yourself to avoid being too much. But now, something stirs deeper than rebellion. A refusal, not to others, but to your own silence. And so the real question arises. What if you stopped hiding? What if, instead of negotiating with the social contract, you broke it, quietly, internally, and irreversibly? To break free is not to fight the world. It is to exit the performance. The first step is subtle, psychological, philosophical. You must stop seeking validation from a culture that misreads you. This seems obvious, but it's not, because your mind, for all its intelligence, is still wired for belonging. Your nervous system still flinches at rejection. Your body still craves resonance. And so, unconsciously, you keep trying to win approval from a game that punishes depth. The rebellion begins when you withdraw your need from that system. You no longer measure your worth by how well you fit into conversations that bore you. You stop hoping people will finally get you. You quit making yourself legible to minds that are closed by choice, not capacity. This is not bitterness, this is clarity. The intelligent rebel understands that you cannot convince the majority of something that threatens their equilibrium. People don't fear you because you're wrong. They fear you because you're different, and difference forces self-reflection. That's terrifying for those who have built an identity on repetition. So you stop trying to be accepted, but you also stop resenting it. You realize that not everyone should understand you. And that's not a tragedy, that's liberation. The second step, create a parallel reality. Not a fantasy, not an escape, but a space where your depth is not a burden, but a gift. This means curating your environment with brutal intention. It means saying no to shallow relationships, even if they provide comfort. It means crafting a life, however slow, however small, where your inner world can breathe. You start seeking quality resonance over quantity connection. One friend who challenges your soul is worth more than 100 who validate your mask. One conversation where you can be honest is worth more than a lifetime of networking. One book that reshapes you is worth more than 100 that distract you. This is what Nietzsche called becoming a free spirit, a person who is unchained not only from society, but from the internalized fear of standing alone. It's not easy. At first it feels like exile. But slowly, the exile becomes sanctuary. You discover that your solitude is not empty. It is filled with signal. You begin hearing your own thoughts again. You remember what it feels like to explore an idea without censoring it. You notice beauty where others see only distraction. You become you again, not as a performance, but as a presence. The third step is more radical. You begin to invert the lens. Instead of seeing your difference as a liability, you see it as an evolutionary gift. Think of this: throughout history, every major paradigm shift began with someone who did not fit the norm. Not because they were smarter in the IQ sense, but because they refused to collapse their truth for social harmony. Galileo refused to lie about the stars. Socrates refused to speak flatteries to the state. Emily Dickinson refused to simplify her voice to be understood. Nikola Tesla, misunderstood and dismissed, built the future in silence. These weren't rebels for fashion. They were rebels by necessity. They did not choose alienation. They chose integrity, and alienation came as a consequence. You are cut from the same cloth. The world has changed, but the architecture of conformity has not. You will still be misread, misjudged, perhaps even ridiculed. But now you will not take it personally, because you see the machinery. You no longer internalize the insult. You see that shallow minds will always fear deep ones, because to understand you, they would first have to dismantle themselves. And most people will never do that. So you walk your own path. You learn to speak in your own dialect, even if only a few understand it. You begin to write, create, build, not for applause, but for coherence. You stop trying to belong, and instead you begin to become. This becoming is your rebellion. It is not loud, it is not performative, it is not viral. But it is dangerous, to the status quo, to shallowness, to the great sleepwalking of civilization. And it spreads, not by conversion, but by recognition. Because when someone who has felt invisible sees you standing fully as yourself, they feel it in their bones. Maybe I can be that free too. And so the rebellion grows, quietly, in the minds of the misfits, the outliers, the thinkers and feelers who have spent their lives camouflaging. You are not alone. There are others who feel the dissonance, who dream of a world where depth is not punished, who ache for honesty, who crave the sacredness of truth spoken without fear. You don't need to save them. You only need to stop betraying yourself. Because every time you choose authenticity over acceptance, you fracture the illusion. And the illusion only survives through your participation. This is how you break free. By refusing to be complicit in your own silencing. The cost is high, but the reward is rare. A life where your mind is no longer your enemy. Where your truth is no longer your burden. Where your difference is no longer your shame, but your signature. And this brings us to the final question. If intelligence is not the curse, but the key, what is the truth it's trying to lead you to? Imagine standing in front of a mirror that reflects not your appearance, but your essence. What would you see? Not the performance, not the masks you've worn to be palatable, not the smile you learned to wear when the silence inside you was screaming. No, this mirror shows you everything, the brilliance you've hidden, the pain you've absorbed, the questions that never left you alone. It shows you unvarnished, and for a moment you cannot look away. This is the ultimate truth. Not a theory, not an idea, but a confrontation. Because once you see it, really see it, there is no going back. And the truth is this: you were never broken. The world just lied to you about what wholeness looks like. From the beginning, you were told to strive for belonging, but belonging was never meant to cost your inner clarity. You were told to be normal, but nobody mentioned that normality is often the byproduct of fear. You were told to succeed, but success was defined by those who feared depth, not those who embodied it. And so you believed that your discomfort was a disorder, that your alienation was a mistake, that your inability to tolerate hypocrisy was some kind of failing. But now you see, it was never that you were too much. It was that the world was too little, too narrow to hold your insight, too afraid to face your questions, too invested in comfort to tolerate your complexity. You suffered not because you were defective, but because your mind was awake in a culture that thrives on sedation. This is not a romanticization of pain. This is a reckoning. The intelligent suffer deeply not just from what the world does to them, but from what they do to themselves in trying to make peace with a world that does not recognize them. They shrink, they camouflage, they dilute their own signal. And this is the real tragedy, not that society misunderstands you, but that you began to misunderstand yourself. That you interpreted your discomfort as dysfunction. That you called your vision overthinking. That you mistook your loneliness for unworthiness. But the mirror tells a different story. It tells you your mind was never meant to conform. It was meant to awaken. Not just you, but others. The deepest realization is this. You are not here to fit in. You are here to remember. To remember what? That truth matters more than agreement. That depth matters more than popularity. That solitude is not emptiness. It is where the real begins to speak. You are here to be a tuning fork for reality. A lighthouse for other minds who are still lost in fog. A permission slip for those who are afraid of their own intensity. But to embody this, to live from this knowing, requires the final step. Radical self-acceptance. Not as a slogan, not as self-help fluff, but as a visceral, spiritual act of defiance against the architecture of your own shame. It means you stop apologizing for your silence in crowds. You stop explaining your need for space. You stop reducing your vocabulary to be relatable. You stop asking for permission to feel the world as deeply as you do. Because here's the ultimate paradox. The more you accept your difference, the less lonely it becomes. Not because the world changes overnight, but because your inner war ends. You no longer see your sensitivity as a weakness. You no longer resent your vision as a curse. You no longer internalize rejection as truth. And then something strange happens. You begin to encounter others who have also seen the mirror. They come quietly, not with banners but with eyes that recognize, with language that resonates, with presence that doesn't shrink from your intensity but meets it. You realize you are not alone, you never were. You were just surrounded by people pretending, while you were trying to be real. And the moment you stop pretending, reality starts to respond. Not always with applause, but with alignment. Conversations shift, environments evolve. You find yourself pulled into ecosystems that don't punish your intelligence, they require it. Because here's the final, sacred insight. The world you were born into was not your home. The world you are here to build is. And you build it one liberated mind at a time. Starting with your own. You stop asking for a seat at their table. You build your own, even if it's small at first. Even if it's lonely. And from that place, something unshakable begins to grow. Self-trust. Coherence. Inner peace that is not dependent on being understood, but on being true. This is the gift only the deeply intelligent can offer. The courage to live without illusion. The integrity to think without permission. The grace to be alone without collapse. Because once you touch this level of truth, you can never go back. You don't want to. The surface no longer tempts you. Approval no longer seduces you. And the roles that once confined you no longer fit. You walk differently now, not above others, not beneath them, but outside the theater. And from that place, the world is no longer something you fear or resent. It is something you see clearly. And because you see it, you can shape it. Not with violence, not with ego, but with the quiet, relentless power of an undivided self. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout. It simply is. And in its presence, others remember what they are too. Fade to silence. Just you and the mirror. And the deep, still truth that was always there. Waiting for you to come home,